Hi, my name is Lisa Baroldi, and I'm honored to live in Treaty 6 First Nations of Alberta Territory in Edmonton. I'm originally from Treaty 8 First Nations of Alberta Territory in High Prairie, Alberta, where there were 6 residential schools, and I had no idea until March 2015 that one of those schools is 400 meters from my parents' home. Child welfare. Residential schools, as acknowledged by the Prime Minister's own admission in his 2008 official apology from Canada, were an attack on Aboriginal children and families. They were based on racist attitudes that considered Aboriginal families as being frequently unfit to care for their children. By removing children from their communities and by subjecting them to strict discipline, religious indoctrination, and a regimented life more akin to a life in a prison than a family, residential schools often harmed the subsequent ability of the students to be caring parents. In many ways, the schools were more a child welfare system than an educational one. A survey in 1953 suggested that 10,112 students then in residential schools, 4,313 were either orphans or from what were described as broken homes. From the 1940s onwards, residential schools increasingly served as orphanages and child welfare facilities. By 1960, the federal government estimated that 50% of the children in residential schools were there for child welfare reasons. The residential school experience was followed by the 60s scoop, the wide-scale national apprehension of Aboriginal children by child welfare agencies. Child welfare authorities removed thousands of Aboriginal children from their families and communities and placed them in non-Aboriginal homes without taking steps to preserve their culture and identity. Children were placed in homes across Canada, in the United States, and even overseas. This practice actually extended well beyond the 1960s until at least the mid to late 1980s. Today, the effects of the residential school experience in the 60s scoop have adversely affected parenting skills and the success of many Aboriginal families. These factors, combined with prejudicial attitudes toward Aboriginal parenting skills and a tendency to see Aboriginal poverty as a symptom of neglect rather than a consequence of failed government policies, have resulted in grossly disproportionate rates of child apprehension among Aboriginal children. A 2012 Statistics Canada study found that 14,225, or 3.6% of all First Nations children aged 14 and under were in foster care, compared with 15,345, or 0.3% of non-Aboriginal children. As Old Crow Chief Norma Cassie said at the Northern National event in Inuvik, quote, "The doors are closed at the residential schools, but the foster homes are still existing and our children are still being taken away," end quote. The Commission agrees Canada's child welfare system has simply continued the assimilation that the residential school system started. Canada's child welfare crisis has not gone unnoticed in the international community. In 2012, the United Nations Committee on the Rights of the Child expressed to Canada its concern about the frequent removal of children in Canada from families as a first resort in cases of neglect, financial hardship, or disability. In its report, the committee singled out the frequency with which Aboriginal children are placed outside their communities, noting that Canada had failed to act on its own Auditor General's findings of inequitable child welfare funding. The committee concluded that, quote, "urgent measures," end quote, were needed to address the discriminatory overrepresentation of Aboriginal children in out-of-home care. I encourage you to look into a program here in Edmonton by Bentaro Traditional Healing Society and Boyle Street Community Services called Kakiao, which is an innovative approach to child welfare that is completely Indigenous-led. It's called Kakiao. Thank you.